Good morning. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm just conscious of our time, so I will call us to order. The doors are still open, so a few people may still wander in. But thank you very much for joining us as we start our discussion. I'm very excited about this opportunity, actually. We're going to discuss the opportunity for partnerships and the importance of that as we think about the evolution of fintech, we think about the evolution of financial services, and we think about the opportunity that that presents. I'll be delighted as the conversation progresses to hear your questions from the audience. Be a very important part of our discussion. Before we get into the discussion, though, let me introduce this fantastic panel that have agreed to join me today to talk about this really important topic. So I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Curran, Customer Banking Director at Tsb. Mark has a long and very successful career in banking, right the way through a number of different organisations, and has a fantastic perspective that he can bring on this topic and indeed on the retail banking changes over the years. I'd be delighted to hear your perspective, Mark. We're also joined by Colin Payne. Thank you, Colin, for joining us. Colin is the next generation financial services global lead at NCR, another fantastic perspective on this topic and conversation. And we'll be really interested to hear from Colin's experiences across his career on tech, financial services, curiosity, creative thinking, and that opportunity to really progress business through a collaborative way. Thank you, Colin, for joining us. James Varga is next on this fantastic panel. James is the founder and CEO of DirectID, one of our Scottish fintechs based here with a global footprint, establishing a very successful business. And James is very active across the conversation on fintech innovation, the opportunity for more collaboration, the opportunity to advance fintech outcomes. And last but by no means least, we have Abbie Buchan at the end of our table here, and Abbie is the Senior Client Manager at Amiqus. And Abbie has been with Amiqus for 4 years and responsible for the onboarding and support team there. So thank you all very much for joining us. I have taken the time to do that bit of introduction, but please don't be shy as the conversation comes to you. Tell us more about your career. That would be fantastic to hear. So as we think about the opportunity, we're going to focus our time today, as I said, on the relationship between big and small. So experience is showing us that partnerships between fintechs and financial institutions is significantly important, both for business model success, for fintech innovations, and increasingly for financial institutions. We are seeing evidence that it enhances business opportunities and it drives capabilities across the ecosystem. And significantly, we know in Scotland and across the UK that more and more fintechs are building propositions that are B2B or B2B2C. So they see this as a very important route to market, working and connecting with the large financial services institutions. So we're going to discuss this in our panel today. The opportunity that this presents and what we need to do to really drive successful partnerships or successful opportunities in this regard. How can it really drive revenue? How can it really drive opportunities for the financial services sector? And what action do we need to take to see change? Anybody that knows me will know that I'm an action-oriented individual, so we'll leave today with some actions. But Mark, can I turn to you first, please, to offer your perspective on this potential between big and small and partnerships?
Yeah, no, I think I was just reminiscing a little bit earlier with James. I think the last time we sat on a panel together was the night before PSD2 went live, not into law, but actually became law. I think James invited me to point out that fintech were going to take over the world from the banks, and
we're working on it. It's just a slow process. We need more partnerships, Mark.
Well, and I think that's the key point. I think when we all set out on the kind of open banking journey, probably 2013, 2014, the thought was fintechs were going to take over the world and dispossess banks of their customers. And I think to some extent that happened a little bit, but I think we've naturally migrated into a world now where the financial services organisations start to value the role that fintechs can bring. And we recognised in TSB some years ago that there wasn't a lot of value in us being a big behemoth financial technology company when there were lots of players out there providing tech and thought leadership that could outthink us and outdevelop us. So we did a number of things. The first thing, we created the Tsb Labs on the first cycle we ran in the south, which was all about finding young fledgling fintech businesses and incubating them through TSB. We only picked one or two because scale-wise it'd be tough to run it well for more than that. But out of that we launched a business called AppTap, and we now embed AppTap into our customer proposition, and it's one of our core services that we offer. And we're in the middle of selection for Tsb Labs in Scotland at the moment. We'll announce that in the next kind of 6 or 7 weeks. And what do we give? We give the business some space. We give it some mentoring. We embed it into our IT floor, and we kind of help them. And I'm really looking forward to that. The thing I would say about partnerships is we kind of always have something we want to do. So it's about making sure that whatever you bring it forward is relevant, and bring it forward at a time that we're looking. So we've the TSB Scotland Labs, we're looking at our sustainability agenda and anything in fintech that can support that, and also cost of living challenges for consumers at this point is really tight. So we kind of try and pick areas we want to look at rather than everybody just bring everything, because that's 2 areas we want to look for. But I think we're at a tipping point. I think the big guys have now realised kind of fintech can bring something quicker, faster, smarter to the market, and we're just releasing our new strategy, and it's all about partnership. We've created a function in the bank called partnerships, and their job is to go out and find opportunities. So I think the world has changed. Also helped by the fact that some of the big guys have ING closed Yolt down last week in its entirety. So we're not great at fintech on our own. So I think there's a real opportunity to bring the community with the financial services organisation and strengthen it.
Great, thanks, Mark. Great perspective. And Colin, I'll come to you actually, because I know in our conversations in the past, you talk about this importance of ecosystem and that connectivity and the opportunities that presents.
Yeah, it's critical. Before I was at NCR, I was more involved in building banks, and actually I was involved in building a bank for one of the telcos, Orange, in France. And it was the first time I really understood how an ecosystem could really outpace the market. So we had a conversation with Orange. 2 months later, we acquired the license. So we got the banking bit of it, the regulated part, and I pulled together 44 fintechs to produce a banking service, a brand new offer for the French market. We did that in just under 12 months from scratch. And I know a lot of people talk about pace and bringing a bank to market or a new proposition to market. That was pretty pacey. I mean, for any major bank to even bring a new proposition to the market would take longer than that usually. I know it's getting a little bit quicker nowadays, but it's that pace that was just revolutionary. And I'm really glad about what Mark says, because I think a lot of the tier ones and challengers started assuming they could build innovation teams in-house, they could turn themselves into a big tech. And I heard this a lot from some of the tier one banks I worked with. We're a big tech. I think Deutsche Bank were the first to say it. We're a big tech. No, you're not. You're a bank. You're really good at being a bank. Yeah. Leave the technology to those like James and the other teams who can, in a much more focused way, approach the proposition. And that's an ecosystem. That's valuing someone else, valuing a partner. And I think what Mark talks about, that pivot, was moving from a time and space where banks didn't value partnership in technology, where they treated more or less everyone as a vendor. And the relationship was a supplier to us. And I remember, Mark, talking with, I looked at HSBC's process, and we put together what we call the Fintech Concierge, which was really just to change the mindset. HSBC would take 9 months to onboard a fintech and treat them as a supplier. Well, we had to change that, and that pivot's actually happened now. So I'm quite pleased to see that, because now ecosystems have some trusted partnerships and two-way respect, which I think is the big change.
Vital, isn't it? Absolutely.
Massively.
Yeah.
Massively.
I really like that phrase, valuing someone else. That's
even if it's 3 people in a new company, they just might be doing something that's so extraordinary. I mean, I go back maybe 10 years. I remember people like Christo launching TransferWise. It was 3 people and a dog, and look at Wise now. if you get the right idea with the right team, it can be extraordinarily beneficial for you as a bank.
Yeah, absolutely. Abbie, can I draw you in? Because Colin picked up on that topic of pace, and when we were chatting in advance of today, some of the work that Amiqus has been doing, particularly with the NHS, I guess, as you think about beyond the banking sector and that opportunity for partnerships, you referenced pace, and particularly across the COVID period. Do you want to share from your perspective as a smaller business that opportunity to partner and work?
Yeah, definitely. There's huge value in it. So, as Nicola mentioned, the partnership that we had with NHS was during the pandemic. The need to get vaccinators into their roles as quickly as possible, and not doing the kind of the paper-based method of checking documentation, in person. So using our platform, the NHS, when we partnered with them, they had a real interesting pulling on the value and the need. Successful partnerships, they had a need and a requirement to get people in for this vaccination rollout that's helped us all get through the pandemic. So really the partnership, we could provide that service. So, streamlining, speeding up their onboarding process, and it was a huge success, saved them so much time. But it's also allowed Amiqus to have more exposure to different NHS trusts that we wouldn't have had access to. So I think from, speaking about, the speed that was ignited by the pandemic, but also the speed that we've spoken about here, rather than trying to build too many processes and build the tech in-house, is find the experts in the field and partner with them. And it, obviously from Amiqus's perspective, it's allowed us to grow and get the exposure and distribution benefits there as well. Fantastic.
Find the experts in the field. There's another great phrase. And James, what's your perspective on the opportunity ahead?
Well, it's a really interesting one, and excuse me, I think we've been talking about it as industry for a long time, this sort of David and Goliath paradigm. And of course, as a startup, you want to sell your services to a bank, but as a young company, it's almost impossible. And equally, banks taking that, we're great innovators and we can do this ourselves, we'll just build it ourselves because it's easy. What you're doing isn't that complicated. We'll set up a new payment platform or something. We can do that. And we can't trust a small fintech of 3 people, because putting a 20 million mortgage book in the hands of 3 people in their garage just doesn't equate, right? So there's always been this parallel thing. I think it's really interesting to see some of the conversations now move into the terminology shift around partnership instead of that supplier-customer relationship, which I think is really fundamental, because your mindset needs to change. The big institution needs to embrace technology in small iterations and get comfortable with it and be more lean and agile and test something. Don't give me your whole mortgage book. Give me one user to start with. As a fintech, one user is all I need to get a bit of feedback, right? Yeah. And then you get a little bit more comfort, I get a bit more comfort, and we grow through this thing together. I think that's the fundamental shift we need to really hold on to and lean into in order to build these bridges, because we need these bridges for the whole industry to succeed, right? I mean, banks are still a dominant player in the market, right? Tier 1, Tier 2 banks are still the big Goliaths, the big incumbents, and control a lot of those channels that, as fintechs, we want access to.
Yeah.
But it's about that mind shift difference.
There's one thing, I love the phrase partnership. But when you bring partners together, we're not all equal. We don't all think the same way. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges around bringing fintech and large FS players, not just banks, but large FS players together, is the banks will have a mindset around regulation, because every conversation we have with a fintech will be backstopped against regulation, where the regulator's telling us, doesn't matter who you bank with, doesn't matter who you use services from, actually you're accountable for what they do. So that partnership where you want to kind of throw the doors open and wrap your arms around people and welcome them openly, you're kind of like, well, okay. Let's have a little chat first and kind of see if there's any chance we could, and then trying to just get both sides. So I think part of the partnership is each side, and I do mean each side, understanding the drivers and the way that the other works.
Yeah.
I agree.
As important or even more important for the fintech, because I think sometimes there's a misexpectation there, right? I mean, a bank's got a, financial services company, NCR, big global player, you've got an innovation program. Yeah, come on, we're doing something great. Why don't you just use it? And the reality is, unless you're at a certain time and place that you can tick those compliance, insurance, regulatory, referenceability, the risk associated with the big incumbent dealing with a fresh new proposition, once you get that balance right, or until you get that balance right, let's just be honest, there's no chance of selling your service to that business, right? And having that conversation, I think, is really important. It's not just as much about the pain that you're solving, but how to work together to solve that pain, right?
Yeah.
And where each of you need to be in order to have a real conversation.
That comes back, I think, Mark, to your point about and Abbie's point, what's the need, and being really clear on what's the need. And I think what we've seen in Tsb Labs and some of the other approaches is that confidence as an organisation to be public about what your need is. And that really then helps with that opportunity for responsible innovation, I think.
I think there's also, picking up on both these points, I think what Mark says is right. I mean, the guys in the bank can go to prison. It's quite a driver to get things right and to not screw up.
And I don't suit orange, by the way.
No, exactly. And what James says, the driver from a small fintech, I'm quite kind of pleased that we're going through a bit of a change in the market as well. I mean, we're in macroeconomic different territory than we were in. I mean, we've had a 10-year run downhill, cheap money. It's been a very, very interesting, dynamic world. Suddenly, the fintechs are finding it much more difficult to raise finance.
Yeah.
Valuations are becoming more realistic. All of that is a really good thing for the industry. And actually, I put my hand up as NCR. I mean, yes, we've been around 140 years, so there's a lot of legacy for us. We know how to do the technology for these guys because all our stuff is mission critical. What we've found really beneficial is to step in and say, well, okay, we'll work with the fintechs, help them innovate in mission critical scenarios, and actually we often buy the IP or license the IP to allow us to supply. So we end up being a middleman. Yeah. But more than a middleman, it's kind of, we understand what needs to happen. And I think there's some roles that can be defined now which can really help everyone. And that's not promoting us, but I just think there's understanding, to what Mark says, understanding the reality of the world.
Yeah, and it's that respect point, I think. We will come to the floor if there are any immediate questions. Can I see any hands? Oh, there's someone at the back there, Pete.
Hello.
If you could let us know who you are, please, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jasneet, and I had a question when it was mentioned, like when you start working with a bank, don't give the whole account, just give me one account so that it can be checked whether the technology works. But aren't there issues with scale up later on? There would still be scale up risk. And another part of the question is it has been noticed that fintech companies and banks need to coexist in this world. So in that respect, what do you suggest? How should fintech companies whether they should continually challenge the banks or should try in terms of as you mentioned right now that you take the IP and be the middleman. So what sort of steps should be there
Okay, so I think if there's two parts to your question. It's about that support to help businesses to scale and how that partnership can work in that scaling agenda. And then it's that kind of, the other part, I think your question was about enabling that trust to know that it is a true partnership. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I think scale, if I had to head off on scale, I think what James is talking about is when you can test a customer need with a technology and interface with one piece of data, one customer, one record, that allows you to prove the concept. It's exactly the same as the internal teams would have to do for Mark anyway. You have to go through that process to prove the concept out. Scaling is always a demanding task in whether it's core banking or fintech. But I think you've got more chance if you move in a progressive way, slowly extending the scaling of that task. So, getting a larger sample. I think you can say with technology, that's helped us, the supply of SaaS products or platform as a service or whatever. We've got to that point where we know how to scale. But I think the more demanding thing is, can the business scale with it? So to your point, Nicola, do we have the staff to support it, Do we have the budgets to support it? And as you get into those business scaling issues, that can be more challenging for a fintech, I think. So the bank has a responsibility. To be honest, the bank's natural instinct and its skill set is identifying businesses which can be backed, usually with loans in banking, and then scale. That's the job of a bank. So they're actually natural bedfellows. You should be able to do that pretty well. And I've seen that work a lot in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, and I think the second part of the question, should fintechs and banks compete? Look, I think they should. I think there's some great examples out there where technology or product or service have differentiated smaller businesses and allowed them to come up. And there's some great examples of neobanks who have come from nowhere 4 or 5 years ago, Starling, Monzo and others. I think there's a point, though, where you get so far and it starts getting slower and harder. And that point, and the current climate, that point is here pretty much, where people are starting to struggle. They're starting to look at their mortgage and their current account and kind of, well, I'm going to stretch the term of my mortgage and to try and make my payments lower. That involves conversations with people, and that really starts to become a burden. Kind of that's why the financial services organisation have got 7,000-8,000 people in them, half of those dealing with customers on a daily basis. So kind of there's a tipping point. I think where you have to become you stop becoming a fintech and you become a financial services institution, and it's just inevitable. You can't help it. But I think competition is great. I think though what we're seeing in the market, that B2C switch to B2C, we're going to see more and more of that. I think kind of new entrants to the market in financial services, it's a long old slog, and I think if the banks recognise the benefit of the fintechs providing technology and support and capability, then that'll be a winner. We did something around the bounce back loan last year where we had to build a collections and recoveries capability to manage the bounce back loans that we put out, and we actually went with a large a consulting house to help build that because of the pace, but we stipulated in the contract that we want it to be a fintech solution. So kind of, whilst we didn't go out and find one ourselves, because we hired people and we put it in the contract that we wanted to use a fintech, and we use a company 3-4 years old called Flexus to manage all the customer communications on that collections and recoveries management of the bounce back loan scheme. We didn't do that 2 years ago. So I think there's lots of scope for it. I think there will always and should always be competition. I'd hate to see almost a non-compete between the financial services institutions and the fintechs. But I think there's just a natural levelling up that you get when you start chasing scale.
It's a conscious mindset, I think.
It is.
Sorry.
And I think, sorry, just to build on that as well a little bit, I think as a fintech, one of my lessons is don't do it too early, right? The idea that we're going to go and sell our services to TSB when we're a year old isn't going to happen, right? I think the reality is very, very, there's 1 in 100,000, a million, billion chance of that happening, right? So the more focused you can be as a proposition to solve a distinct pain, the easier it is for the counterparty to understand that, find that use case and fit and all the rest of it, but also appreciating all the other things you need to have in place to get that buy-in, and how much effort it takes for the bank to do anything. A lot of banks, to set up a project team will cost them a few $100,000. Or that panel Mark was referring to, he eloquently, and I've used this 100,000 times myself, he talked about PSD2 and how much of a momentous effort this is for a bank, which is a different perspective than a fintech, right? I mean, opening up a new channel, I think is how you described it, into your proposition is akin to internet banking and credit cards and all the rest of it. Huge amount of effort goes into that. But as a fintech, give me 2 days and I can set up an API. I mean, what's the problem, And so I think that we need more understanding. We need more, I guess, knowledge sharing between the parties to figure out how to make those first few steps.
I know we have some more questions on the floor. Certainly one up here, Pete, as well. You go.
Hello, I'm Tanya Nicola here, and thank you very much for the informative session and giving us great insight. So I've got 2 questions, and the first question would be about culture. Now, you have explained the benefits of collaboration, but how do you address these challenges around different cultures? And the second question is that there seems to be a gap between fintech and traditional banks. And what would you say is the main resistor right now as we speak?
Sorry, I didn't catch the latter part of your question.
No,
I've got two questions.
Yeah,
So,
I got the majority of the second. I just missed the last few words.
Yeah, so the last few words I was asking that there is a gap between fintech and traditional banks at the moment, and what would you say is the largest resistor right now?
The largest resistor. Thank
what
you.
is causing
The largest
that?
resistor. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we got the right word. Who would like to take that question?
Well, culture I can step into, and I'm sure everyone else can say it. I think banks have, for the last few years, looked to change their culture, perhaps stimulated by what they've seen in big tech. And I think that's the same in fintech as well. So I think you've seen some banks want to become more agile, create more of a workspace environment which is suitable to bringing in quality talent. So there's a lot they're learning, and they're learning from the experiences that are being built by fintech, which demand a certain culture internally. And so I'll give an example of Mondo, or Monzo as they're now called. I just remember their tone of voice with their customer was the talk of the town about 6 years ago. The way they started to interact with their customers through different media forms was revolutionary compared to banking as we know it. I remember one stage they opened up their backlog for their customers to vote on what feature they wanted next. And they just gave a direct link to their backlog. I've never seen anything like it. That's a real culture mix. And the banks have learned from that. So I've been around banks and I've seen the lab spaces, the workspaces. So I think there's a coming together of those cultures. And there's a maturing of the fintech culture, which was all about skateboards and table tennis. And, that's matured. You go into most of the large fintechs now, it's changed. So they're kind of coming to a middle ground, I think. But that's probably my view on culture.
Abbie, Curran, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think, and in the theme of partnerships as well, it's understanding each culture. So if you're working with a large, as an SME, if you're working with a large culture, it's understanding that they may not be able to move as quickly as we can. Interesting you said about the API and setting it up in 2 days. We move so quickly and can be very agile. So I think a lot of it, and going back to what we were saying about value and understanding each party to the partnership's value, is just taking that into consideration and building relationships with those that you're partnering with, and not getting frustrated by the speed of change sometimes, but how can we as SMEs learn from what banks and larger financial institutions are doing, but just as you've touched there as well, is how can they learn from what we're doing and then collaborate to progress and
And finding your journey as a startup. I mean, Amiqus is a great example of this, right? Of not necessarily, maybe at the beginning targeting a little bit of the banks and financial services, but then having to find other markets to build up momentum, to build up credibility and referenceability, to be able to go, hey, actually you can trust us a little bit, right? And then now into a situation where NHS and whoever is able to kind of go, actually, we trust you enough, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's the beauty of, and one of the key benefits of partnerships for organisations like ourselves is building that trust and building your brand. It can be difficult, but as soon as you get in and you partner with those larger organisations, you put the effort into doing it, you then have brand recognition. And as soon as we started working with Scottish Government, NHS, then suddenly more doors open because people are like, oh, well, you're trusted. And we've just... I've got a new partnership with FNZ Wealth Management Platform. So our software can be used by their clients in different areas. And again, that's then opened up opportunity for us because, as you say, trying to get into large organizations like banks when you're a smaller organization is really tough. But if you can find the right partnerships, that will open up the doors and we'll be serving some of the largest banks and wealth management organisations. So it's a really exciting time. That
helps with that resistance. There are a few other questions.
Just quickly though, because I think this is important. Everyone always disses the banks for not being more innovative. I think there's a lesson though for fintechs to watch our language and how we present ourselves. If I said to the audience, I've built a car this morning in my garage, it seats 5 people, do you want to take your family away on a holiday? Most people would go, no, I don't know if it's going to crash, break down, explode, whatever, right? So I think we have to be careful. Even stuff like we can build an API in 2 days. You can't build, test, sanitize, scale, production ready, secure, maybe we have to think about our language
common
equally
language.
as much.
Absolutely. I will turn to the panel for a call to action before we finish. as we think about that opportunity for more through partnerships. But Pete, I was conscious there was a question at the front, if we could take that, and then I'm watching the time as we make sure we finish on time. Just this chat.
Good morning. David Hood from the Edinburgh Institute, who specialise in competitive advantage for small businesses. Collaboration is a great thing, obviously, and it's great to hear those David and Goliaths, behemoths versus innovative wee techs are now coming together. The one huge disconnect I see is the one with the customer. Now, that could be a philosophical one, and yeah, we all listen to our customers, blah, 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 but there hasn't been the fundamental shift necessary, because we're living in an age now which is possibly, I was just talking to Caroline from Moneybox, who was on this morning's session about this, just at the break there, that we have this disconnect. We're not post, but we don't hear about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding very much these days, but they'll come back. And it's going to be more than a Martin Lewis coming together and getting aggregates, but there are going to be aggregates of customers, consumers and business customers, who are getting more savvy now to dictate to you guys what the future is going to be like, what the next step is going to be like. And regardless of what you think is a feature which will serve the shareholder, which was raised in Mark's session earlier this morning, but the customer's being left behind in all of this. It's all very well the push. I guess my question is, where does the panel see this going? Because you've got musicians now talking to get around Spotify to set up their own thing, because they want a relationship, and they will dictate the tech.
Yeah.
And you've got the seaweed industry doing the same. You've got SMEs now aggregating and talking about, stopping getting shafted by the banks and by big business. So just where does the collaboration with the customer, who are eventually going to come to us and say, this is what we want, rather than you guys going in non-smoke-filled rooms or coffee-filled rooms these days to come up with the latest gizmo?
Yeah, I think that just, how's the customer considered as we develop partnerships?
Oh, I think anyone who works in this industry and doesn't think the customer's in charge now probably ought to retire or find a new industry. And I think kind of the banking industry has changed. I mean, when I started out long time ago in 1987, we closed the branches at 3 PM. There were kind of ATMs, only a third of them, and internet banking, telephone banking was unheard of. I mean, these days we are trying to be right where the customer needs us to be when we need to be them, trying to think ahead. For instance, in the small business market, we've done a partnership with Bankify to create a product called Revenue, and it's all about helping small businesses to be paid, but put it in their hands. So a bit of technology that allows them to download their invoices from Xero or Square, send you a text message, a WhatsApp, a TikTok, whatever you choose to use, and you push the button and it uses open banking to pay you, and then it uploads back into now that's free. We're offering that for free. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have given that away for free. I'd have charged you about £10 a month subscription for it, but that's where the market's going. I think the customer is king. Yeah, it absolutely is. And in a digital world, the customer is king, and that's why the banks are working so hard with these guys to create capability. But you're right, that won't change, that won't slow down, it won't abate, that's just life, it's going to be life going forward. So I think kind of anyone who thinks that we don't recognise that. The second thing I would say is everything we build, we run through a user group of customers, non-customers, people who think they might be customers, kind of what do you think about it, how do you feel about it, will it make a difference, should we do it? And that's really working for us. And the third and last point on partnerships to customers, we started recently doing things where we don't, 5-6 years ago, we'd have insisted we white labeled that into our armory and it became a TSB thing. Actually, these days we don't do that. So AppTap, who is on our website, we incubated that and we let them live as AppTap. The Bankify partnership runs as Revenue, which is one of their brands. So we've gone away from that job of coming in. But customers is in the middle and king will be so. Aggregators getting more noisy, absolutely will happen. Absolutely will happen.
I think from an NCR point of view, I guess, everything we build is for a customer. It's all endpoint. 140 years of doing it. We invented the cash register. It was for a customer need. So I don't think that's ever changed. I think we're getting sharper at it. I think what Mark says is right. I think everything's customer driven now. And I think the regulators are around that as well. So for the last 15 years, the regulator's been very pointed since the financial crisis to make sure competition comes into the market. Yeah. So I think it's an entirely different. From my experience, the idea of creating a feature in a smoke-filled room that hasn't happened for a decade or two for me.
Thank you. I am very conscious of our time, and the Digit team are probably getting a bit anxious that I'm overrunning. But what's our call for action? James, Abbie, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I would say, I'll pull my point from earlier, but work with the experts in the field and find those that are going to bring you value. And to your consumers, that's another point, is just keeping the consumer at the forefront of what you're doing. So going away and designing something together that's not, the consumer needs to be at the forefront. And with that, as well, we're in an age now where the consumer is expecting to be able to do everything in one day, open up something in the same day, and the introduction of technology, but also always keeping in mind the accessibility, and not excluding people in society as well, based on the developments and the pace that we're working at.
Fantastic, thank you. James, anything else you would add?
I'd probably highlight empathy and understanding is like we have to, as fintechs, really, really try to understand who we're trying to deal with. And a good example of this is that customer, as a B2B proposition, as B2C is slightly different, but as a B2B proposition, it's easy to forget the customer, thinking about it as the bank. But we have two customers, right? We have the bank as a B2B2C and their customer. So maybe as a fintech that's B2B, we need to understand their customers better and help them understand what their customers might think of us with them, and that whole relationship that happens there.
Yeah.
But without that understanding, then you just get frustrated. You go, we're a great idea. Mark, why aren't you using us? I'm frustrated. And, it's unproductive.
That's a conversation for later, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, we've had it before.
We'll keep having it. It's
Simply play to your strengths.
Play to your strengths.
That's what you need to do.
Yeah, great advice. Mark?
And mine's a simple one. Look, we love ideas. We love ideas and we love concepts. Just think about where they're ready. Because you'll get one shot, maybe two. And if you come too ready, if you come too early, we've got plenty of others that are ready. So just think about, as you're packaging it up and pushing it forward, we've got a team of people who talk to fintechs around what's going on in the world, but just think about where they're ready. Fantastic.
Really fantastic advice. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel for all their insights. Some great advice there. I've got lots of scribbles, so we'll definitely be taking those forward. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone.